The Federal Reserve is in the tightest position I can imagine that they ever have been in. There's no way out of this. We are ultimately in the biggest monetary experiment, probably in human history.
What's up, guys? I'm Nobody Special, and I have a special guest with me today. I've got Mike from Rethinking the Dollar. Mike, how you doing today?
Jack, I am doing fine, and I appreciate you for the opportunity to connect with you on your channel, man. Looking forward to having a good discussion with you today.
Thank you. It's great to have you on here. I've been a fan of your channel. You are a fellow, if I might venture to say, you probably fall on the Austrian side of things when it comes to economics, and you're certainly very individual liberty and freedom minded. So I found a lot of what you talk about on your channel really resonates with me. So I'm just delighted to have you here. And, there's a lot going on right now, a lot going on in the world.
Yes,
In particular, the Federal Reserve. I was a little surprised last week. We had an awful hawkish Jerome Powell on, what was it, last Wednesday. I was a little surprised. I thought he might wax a little dovish, especially with some of the market volatility. But no, he came out like a hawk, didn't he?
Yes, and the Federal Reserve is in the tightest position I can imagine that they ever have been in their own history of about 108 or so years, 109 or so years as of now. And it looks like, especially just following and just listening to his response, I've never seen Jerome Powell. I tend to try to follow all this, Q&A sessions as best I can, and I've never seen him so jittery, so nervous looking. So he didn't give anything precise. Everything was very broad and in general for future expectations of what they think they're going to attempt to do. But in my personal opinion, I don't think they'll be able to pull any of that off. I just think it's more so them just, the psychological aspects of trying to forward guide the markets and paint the narrative of them being able to tighten. But at this current moment, do you really think that they can tighten given the trouble that the global economy and nevertheless the domestic economy here? So a lot of talk, but we'll see if they're actually able to pull the trigger on anything. That's, I'll hold my comment and let you know how I don't think they'll be able to do it.
I've heard that mentioned a couple of times. People say they can't tighten, and I hear that it's almost as if to say they won't tighten because they can, right? It's just there are consequences of that tightening, and I think what a lot of people are meaning to say, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that they probably won't tighten because of what those consequences are. Not that they can't. They can go do whatever they want. It's just they're going to mess things up when they do it, right? They're going to break something.
100%. And that's the part of they can say one thing, but will they actually be able to do it? Of course, they can say anything. They can say that they are going to, raise interest rates. They're going to do some quantitative tightening with removing all of the liquidity they provided, as well as dial back on their current amount of accommodative policies. But yet the markets themselves are built upon the support of the Federal Reserve Bank, as well as in collaboration with our government going into debt. And so I like to refer to it as, they've cut the monetary spigot on, and that's the continuous dripping of currency designed to support this system. Will they be able to completely cut the spigot off and there not be consequences in the markets? In my personal opinion, I don't think they are able to do so. And based upon the past volatility of the markets, just them jawboning that they're going to has caused a lot of people also to second guess whether or not they can do it. Now, my biggest question would be, why are they trying that now when they should have been doing it months ago, if not even perhaps a year ago? So I think this is leading to something a lot bigger and more dangerous for your average person. And so it's very interesting times we're in.
It does strike me as odd why they waited so long. They all that talk earlier last year, basically the whole first half of the year up until July, with that ridiculous, we're not even thinking about, or we're not even talking about. I don't understand why they kept that going for so long, because we saw the inflation rate was creeping up. Even if you take the inflation statistics at face value, which I don't,
right?
Why would they keep the spigot on? Why would they keep pumping that money into the system as inflation crosses 3% into 4, as it crosses 4 into 5? They didn't even turn hawkish until July, when we were already up over 5%.
Right. I think a lot of that accommodative policy was due to the government's demand. So our federal government themselves were requiring so much assistance, as well as just the overall underlying market itself has become dependent upon it. So we had I think 3 or 4 stimuluses, if I'm not mistaken, different types, American CARES Act, the American Rescue Act, American something other act. So all those acts themselves were brought on by the government. And of course, the Federal Reserve had to be accommodative with those things through the Federal Open Market Committee and things like that. But yet the idea of them trying to continue to predict ahead what they wanted to do while not being able to do the opposite. So why not say the transitory side of things? Inflation will be transitory. It's going to go away by the end of next year. And I think even this year, Janet Yellen's saying that they should have it under control by the end of this year. So clearly they've been lying about that. So they're using time, in my opinion, to stall. They're stalling, knowing that they really can't afford to hike rates. But then again, we can no longer have easy accommodative policies because that also causes problems. So whether they raise or whether they don't, there's still going to be problems ahead. And I think they realize that. And now it's a matter of them trying to, front run and just give people this illusion that they're able to do what they can't do, in my personal opinion.
And they did kind of miss a window because early last year, they still had $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion in the Treasury General account. I mean, they had all that extra money that they printed in 2020 in the response to the unfortunate health situation.
Right.
And, they spent down that money most of last year. So they really weren't borrowing any more money. The government wasn't selling a lot of new treasuries or issuing a lot of new treasuries. It was the perfect time where the Fed could have slowed down that liquidity. Now we have the Fed slowing down the injection of that liquidity. At the same time, the treasuries they've exhausted the Treasury General account, and now they've raised the debt ceiling. So they're going to start issuing new supply of Treasury bills soon. Well, that's going to double the impact of the taper now, because not only do you have the supply of cash being cut off, but you've got new supply of treasuries getting dumped on the market. Now they're going to get squeezed from both ends.
Definitely. And it's all disguised to continue to stimulate the economy while needing an inflation, because the only way out of this ultimately it's a currency issue. Ultimately, this boils down to the currency crisis that is happening right now, in my personal opinion. And so a part of what they're trying to do is trying to work out the nuances of how to run a very extremely complicated system here. Like the amount of financial products, as well as just a hyper financialization of the entire global monetary system, is so complicated that at this current moment, I don't really think that they have control of what they're actually trying to accomplish, to where, to me, nothing personally makes sense. But I know ultimately the only way out of this is to ultimately debase the currency. So I think the currency crisis that is currently underway is the primary gauge as to whether they're successful or not, whether it be our government or the Federal Reserve, because ultimately we all know, based upon history, what happens with fiat currencies when you run massive deficits, as well as you run into all these detailed nuances of a complicated economic model / financial system. There's no way out of this. We are ultimately in the biggest monetary experiment probably in human history, just because things are not only digital, but yet all these products they've built on top of it. It's extremely complicated, but yet we know ultimately, Federal Reserve note, in my personal opinion, as I always say on my channel, will be your biggest financial liability at some point in the future. So,
yeah, and I mean they've already told us through their action that that's what they're going to do, right? They can't even stop growing the debt, let alone they can't even slow down the rate at which they're growing the debt, let alone stop growing the debt, let alone reduce the debt or pay it off. Right? I mean, the rate at which the debt is growing is ever increasing. So through their action, they're telling us we have no intention of ever paying this money back. So once you realize that, now you're left with, then what is the end game here? The end game has to be defaulting on the debt one way or another, whether that's outright not paying back the treasuries, which I don't think they'll do, because that will be too easy for people to see. I think the average person can understand the government didn't pay their bills, and that's why everything broke. And that's why the public is generally united against raising or not raising the debt ceiling, right? Most of the public supports raising the debt ceiling every time, because they're like, no, we have to pay our bills. But they don't realize there is no way we can pay our bills. And that leads to the only other eventuality, which is the default on the debt via hyperinflation, via inflating it away to nothing. And that just kind of falls down into financial education. Most people just don't understand that.
And that's where I like to talk about the monetary side of things. How, I run a quiz on my website, and based upon just 10 simple questions referring to monetary history in reference to the Federal Reserve note, also known as a dollar. I like to distinguish between the two as best I can, because the Federal Reserve note is what's actually the weapon being used now against the world. And so once the gold peg was removed from the dollar, it became a free floating fiat currency. And since then, that has been the tool used to put us in this position that we're in now, where the debt is unsustainable. All the financial products, everything from our retirement portfolios to the stock market itself, is all dependent upon Federal Reserve notes, aka the digital versions of dollars or whatever that's in a system that has driven these hyper bubbles to the point where confidence is being lost. That everyone pretty much knows the debt can't be repaid. So it's a matter of trying to, I think, stall things out, get as much out of this current system that they can until there's, probably some unforeseen event that leads to the reset of our current monetary structure, ideally through the currencies and whatnot. Then, of course, that leads us to the CBDCs and things like that. But it all boils down to the purchasing power of the current units we have now. And over time, you'll be able to purchase less and less, without people really even knowing that it's the currency itself, just because they distracting us with so many other things happening right now. And ultimately, it's the currency not being able to actually hold much of its value any longer. So that's the unfortunate thing of just people not having monetary literacy, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I think what may eventually come out of this when this reset happens and the carnage that ensues from it, I think people are going to have a financial and a monetary education forced on them against their will. They're going to be forced to understand what caused this and what happened. And I'm sure the spinsters and the propagandists on both sides will each try to spin the story to their own benefit. But ultimately, people, the system that springs up out of this is going to mandate understanding what went wrong and what happened. People are going to have to know, and they're going to figure out that it was the money printing, it was the never-ending deficits, and that ultimately it falls with Congress and their enablers, the central bankers. That if you really had to pin it, who caused this and where it came from, that's
very true. Now, if I can, I want to share a little visual aid that I put together that I often refer to, just because it highlights how this is bigger than politics. It's more than just, your favorite candidate, your favorite policy. The system in and of itself, ever since the creation of the central banking, or we're on our third central bank, but yet ever since the advent of the Federal Reserve System that took place in 1913, we've had 19 administrations. And I like to say that based upon the trend we're on now, the amount of purchasing power of a single unit that we call the Federal Reserve note or the dollar, it doesn't purchase much of anything, maybe 2 to 3 cents. And in my personal opinion, as of right now, you really can't go to the store and buy anything for a single unit of currency. So I would like to say we're already sub-zero when it comes to what you can actually purchase for a dollar. But here on this graph here, we have the Democrats and Republicans. So it's not like it's a right versus left thing. This is just the way the system has been designed, and every politician have played their part towards just destroying the purchasing power of our dollar. So I just want people to realize that it's not a blue, red, rhino. It's just fact that there's much a greater stakes at play right now, and a lot more people than just the current administration that's a part of this. So everybody's played their part. And in my personal opinion, I think this current administration right now, this will be the last administration of this current monetary structure, because as you can see here, we're not working with much of this monetary unit here known as the Federal Reserve note. So I think everything that's happening now plays right into their plan of being able to usher in some type of new form of currency. And of course, we know what's becoming a mainstream subject as of now, and it happens to be the CBDC that's being talked about now that their discussion paper came out, I think it was last week or so.
Yeah. Asking for our feedback. That was interesting. My favorite was when they asked if there should be a maximum amount that people are allowed to have.
Exactly. And that lets you know the intentions of having a centrally controlled digital representation of what we've known as Federal Reserve note, because ultimately, at some point down the line, cash will become a threat to the system itself, because that'll be your way of being able to retain whatever last bit of purchasing power you might think you have in a physical form, i.e. a paper note, because of course the banking structure will be brought in with the CBDCs and things like that. So the ultimate form of a surveillance coin, in my opinion, comes through a CBDC.
So on the subject of CBDCs, we actually had a question submitted by one of my subscribers in advance. This is from Carlos Gonzalez, and Carlos uses some strong words here. He says, will there be any way to avoid using a Fed coin, or is our slavery to the government inevitable?
Ooh, great question.
Strong language there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So ultimately, I think the way things are heading, and I like to look at things from a broader viewpoint, I believe this entire experience that we're having now, it's a long drawn out plan, and it's a part of the World Economic Forum's vision for the future through their Great Reset agenda and things like that. And so ultimately, as all this unfolds and the amount of destruction that's done to our financial system, as well as the ruin that they're placing on families now with all this other things that's going on now, it will put people in a very desperate and destitute situation to where out of sheer and dire circumstances, people will more than likely at some point in the future, they won't mind using this new form of currency because it'll spend, and it'll be the easiest way for them to sustain themselves still, whether they're being paid in it or trying to just do peer-to-peer transactions amongst themselves with friends. It will be something I think that we will all use. Now, because we are using it, that don't mean we have to save it. That don't mean we have to rely upon it for our entire financial world, because gold and silver, which is the real form of true money, will also be an option. How it operates in this new new world they're trying to create, I don't know, but yet people will use it. I don't think people will save in it as much at first, but then again, this is a long-term play, so I think people will use it. But then also, based upon history, when economies crumble, especially Zimbabwe and Argentina, people find other ways of getting around the forced legal tender mandates, and they have what's called black market things, which is painted in a very negative light. But then again, it's useful for a lot of people on the ground in places, so I think it'll be used. People won't save in it, but yet I think in the long-term future, if there are no other options, then of course people will use it. So that's not really very, very comforting to say, but people will use it, but not trust it initially.
Yeah, I think they may not force it right away,
Mhm.
because if they just take away all the cash, if they
Correct.
say you have until next week to surrender all your cash, I think they're going to get a lot of social unrest out of that. So I think it'll be the slow boil, the frog
Right.
in the pot.
Right.
Um, and there are things people can do. You mentioned gold and silver, right?
Mhm. Right.
Um, there's obviously cryptocurrencies that are out there,
Right.
and there's always a barter system, right? But
Correct.
but you're not
Correct.
going to be able to pay your mortgage or your utility bill with a barter system. You're not going to be able to trade your eggs that your chickens laid
Right.
for your mortgage payment. So they will probably eventually force us into it. I
Right.
mean, I
Right.
I think it'll be your only option.
Exactly. And that's the thing.
Um,
It'll be your only option because legally they're going to require everything you do to transact through their ledger, whether it be your direct deposit payments or all of your bills at this current moment, which for the most part are pretty much on auto pay through your checking account. Now, we've never had an environment where we had a single account at some point with a central bank entity. So nobody kind of knows how that's going to play out. But I think at some point, the commercial banks will no longer really be needed. Everything will be transferred into the hands of the central bank, and at that point, we're in a whole new game. But I think
yep.
I think that was the design course of this entire process in the first place. So, yeah, uncertain times are ahead, but yet I think gold and silver. That's why I'm really big on encouraging people to, as I say, get your weight up, because if you understand monetary history, you know how important preserving your financial future will be, and of course, that's something that you can do being proactive by getting your weight up, as I like to say. So that's going to be the ultimate way of preserving
Yeah. And,
yourself financially.
one thing I always worries me about CBDCs is the fact that they're going to be able to program the money, that they can program the
Mhm.
money to operate how they want it to operate. So if we have things like runaway hyperinflation and they're trying to
Mhm.
fight hyperinflation with their CBDC, they can prevent von Mises crack up boom, or they can try to prevent it
Mhm.
by programming the money to say you can only buy so much of any one thing
Right.
per unit time, right? They could ration gasoline through their
Mhm.
CBDC by programming the money attached
Right.
to your wallet to say your wallet can only buy so many gallons or so many pounds of chicken or ground beef or whatever they're trying to control the price of,
Right.
which
And
will
that's
spur on the black market, like you mentioned. I mean, you'll
right.
have
And that's the dangers of having the ultimate form of a surveillance coin, because it's programmable to where it's going to be operated eventually not in your favor. Just because the once you lose the last bit of freedom that you have financially speaking, and at this current moment, all we've known is primarily the Federal Reserve notes, and that of course the world has used it as their current reserve asset. But at the point when the paper is no longer available, unfortunately, a lot of the younger generation don't really know the importance of gold and silver, so they're going to be a little bit of loss as well. But ultimately, being able to have your world determined by people at a computer desk somewhere on the other side of the world, and then you factor in the the AI intelligence that's going to be used as well to keep track of things. It's a very dystopian type of future. It's unfortunate, but yeah, that's the way things seem to be going unless something is done. And I'm very hopeful that something can be done, because we're seeing a lot of pushback in certain areas these days. So there's still hope. I wouldn't give up completely.
Yeah, I just think we need to remind people that 1984 was not an instruction manual; it was a cautionary tale.
Right.
That shouldn't have to be said, but I want to remind people of that.
Right.
I saw a picture on Twitter today. It was a bookstore that apparently those still exist, and it said banned books, and on the table of the books that had been banned was Fahrenheit 451. And I said, well, apparently they've banned The Idiot's Guide to Irony as well, because it's Fahrenheit 451, and it's a book that they banned. It's a book about banning books, and they banned.
Right. So censorship, as well as and I never like to go down the rabbit hole, but I there's been a lot of I told you so's been out here in the alternative media space, but yet based upon the fact checkers, is there's certain words you can't use. We know all those words, but yet they've already tried to control the narrative, and if it doesn't fit within what they want, they meaning those that's trying to orchestrate this entire experience, it's going to be called out against you, and then there'll be problems. And so it's unfortunate, but censorship is going to be extremely bad now, and it's only going to get worse. And the ultimate censorship will be when it comes to your personal financial lives, when you're told what you can and can't do. And that's where they want to take this, I think. And the CBDC will be the best tool for them to do it.
And it's people should understand censorship is not a comorbidity of over oppressive governments or tyrannical regimes. It's a critical, vital ingredient. You cannot suppress the population without censorship. I mean, the first thing you have to do is suppress ideas and suppress dissent. So it is not by chance or by accident that we see a rise in censorship right now.
Right. And then
makes perfect sense.
It's very true. And ultimately what it boils down to for those that are really concerned with their financial world, it's the pursuit of, being financially liberated from our monetary oppressors. And so with the central banking model and all the things they've done to this point, and I think a lot of this has to do with the over dependency on government. Like the government structure has made it to where a lot of family households are dependent upon some form of government assistance. And if you look throughout history, these things have been creeping up to this ultimate crescendo of where things appear to be at its peak. So something has to give. And like always, the problem, reaction, solution, the problem is created. It's the currency. The solution is the government will step in, UBI, things like that will probably be thrown out there. And then a solution is we'll make it more easier for the unbanked to have financial inclusion and things like that. We're going to give you this per month for this. So we see it's like a horror movie playing out in real time. But yeah, that's why I think it's never been more important for, education. Like this is the greatest time in history where through the internet, through channels such as yours, you can actually plug in with people who stay tuned in to the macro picture and able to condense it and not necessarily dumb it down, but make it to where it's understandable for you to be able to just see the amount of pain that's being caused by all of this chaos so that you can protect yourselves. Because ultimately it boils down to purchasing power and preservation of your purchasing power. And that's why, gold and silver and other alternatives are never been more important in my personal opinion than right now.
Mike, you are a voice of reason in an ocean of nonsense, my friend, and you just got to keep at it.
Will do.
We may be swimming against the tide or peeing in the wind, depending how you look at it, but we'll do what we can. Mike, I really appreciate you coming on the channel to talk to us about this stuff. I love your channel. Again, folks, that's Rethinking the Dollar is the name of the channel. I am going to put a link down in the description below. If you're not already subscribed to his channel, click on that link and go check it out. Absolutely fantastic stuff. And again, with definitely a mind towards individual responsibilities and personal freedoms. And I just love that. We need more of that these days. So thanks again, Mike.
Well, yeah, thank you for having me on. Definitely looking forward to connecting in the future and continue to do what you do and continue to fight the good fight of faith of just encouraging people to, take matters in their own hands, because now is the time. It's either now or never. So appreciate you. Looking forward to connecting again.
Right on. All right, guys, until next time, live small and dream big.